The bind method of functions unfortunately has two different purposes. In part one of this tutorial, the previous tutorial, we looked at the binding of this. I will link to that tutorial in the description so you can view it first. In this tutorial, we'll look at how you can do a partial application of the parameters for a function using bind. Welcome to another tutorial from All Things JavaScript. As always, make sure to click that bell button and subscribe. And remember to check out the discount links to all my courses in the description. I really appreciate the support. And if you would like, there are other ways to support the channel which are linked to in the description as well. Now first, what do I mean by partial application of the parameters? Well, when a function expects parameters to be passed in, values to be passed into it, we can use bind to create a new function that has some or all of those parameters already bound to the function. So what that means is that those parameters don't need to be passed into this new function. They're already present. So those parameters are bound to that new function. Now, why would you want to do this? Well, let's look at an example, and in doing so, I'll explain why you may want to do this type of thing. All right, here I have a simple greeting function. Basically, it takes in the greeting. Right here, it has two parameters. So the first one is the greeting that will be displayed. The second one is the name. And so it then just returns a greeting with that name included. Pretty simple. I want simple functions to illustrate this whole concept of partial application. So let's say we wanted to create a morning greeting. Well, we could use bind to do that. And here's how we do it. Const morning greeting. And then we set that equal to greeting, so the initial function dot bind. Now, the first thing we need to pass into bind is an object that will become the value of this for the new function. It's the this binding for that new function. However, when we're doing partial application like this, we don't need that. And since we don't need that, we can just pass in null. And so that was part of the reason why I mentioned that it's too bad that they put both of these functions in the same method instead of doing two methods. So now we've taken care of that object by just passing in null. Now we can deal with the partial application. Now of these two parameters here, which ones do we want to bind to that new function? Well, if we're doing a morning greeting, then we probably want to bind the greet parameter so that it always says good morning or something like that. So let's do that. We will pass in good morning like that. So that's going to create a new function for us. And it's a more specific function. It's specific to giving a morning greeting. And that is one of the advantages of doing a partial application. It is more specific. Now, another advantage is this type of thing is used in functional programming to reduce the arity of functions. And they reduce the arity of functions so that they can do composition. What do I mean by arity of functions? Well, arity simply refers to the number of parameters that are being passed into a function. So in order to do composition, composing multiple functions together, create a new function, you want to get that arity down to 1 preferably. So it just expects a single parameter. Well, and that's what we have right here. We now have a function that accepts 1 parameter. We bound this first parameter greet. So now all it's expecting is the name. So let's take a look at that. Let me save that, jump out here, refresh, and open the console. Now I can do greeting like this, and I can pass in something to the extent of hi as the greeting and Stephen as the name, and it returns hi Stephen. Now let's do morning greeting. Now all I need to do is pass in the name. I don't need to pass in anything else because it's already been bound. That first parameter has already been bound. And notice that I get good morning, Stephen back. And so a common reason for doing partial application is to create a more specific function we have here. We could create an evening greeting. Now, we could bind both of these. So I could create something like this. There may not be a lot of call for this type of thing, but I can do that. So now it's going to be specific to greeting Stephen. We pass in null, pass in good morning again, and then we pass in the name, like that. And that will create a morning greeting for Stephen. Let's just look at that one really quick. I think that was what I called it. No, what did I call it? Oh, I can't spell. That's why I had a problem here. All right. Save that again. There we go. Now we don't have to pass in anything to that function the way it's set up. All right, let me do another example that might illustrate this point as well. Let's say we had a function get power of exponent. And so basically we're going to create a function that allows us to pass in a number and then raise it to a power depending on the exponent that we pass in. We'll accept the number and the exponent, and then basically what we'll return is the number raised to that exponent, like this. So now with that one in there, we can get power of exponent. We can pass in 2 as the exponent and say 10 as the number, and that will return 100. Now from this we can create more specific functions. Like say we wanted to create a function to square the number and we wanted to create a function to cube the number. We can set that up like this. Square num, set that equal to get power of exponent dot bind, and then using bind we want to first pass in the value for this, which we're not using, so we're going to pass in a null. Then we want to pass in the exponent, which is 2, and that will create a specific function that will square the number. And then to cube the number, cube num, I'm going to do the exact same thing. Dot bind, pass in null, and 3 is going to be the exponent that we pass in there. So now we have 2 specific functions which we can use here. Let's square 10 to begin with. That returns 100. Let's cube 10. That returns 1,000. So partial application using bind. You're able to bind certain parameters to the new function. It allows you to create a more specific function. That's a general use within JavaScript. If you're doing functional programming, you can use partial application to reduce the arity, which allows you to do composition. But most people that aren't doing functional programming are going to use these techniques to create a more specific function. All right, I hope that was helpful. Please hit the like button and subscribe. And remember the discount links to all my courses in the description section. Make sure to click that bell button to be notified about new releases. I try to release a new tutorial each week. And thanks for watching.